you'll receive a link to the recording, a personalised certificate, which I myself have signed, and a virtual goodie bag. So hope you all enjoy that. So let's begin with then how to teach speaking skills. Now, you probably agree that possibly the thing that your students want to do most is be able to speak in English fluently and confidently. Now, obviously, there are other skills involved in learning English, but speaking, I think we normally take as the primary one. Let's see what a few people have to say about speaking. So this is Scott Thornbury, and he says, speaking is so much a part of daily life that we take it for granted. The average person produces tens of thousands of words a day. So natural and integral is speaking that we forget how we once struggled to achieve this ability. Until that is, we have to learn how to do it all over again in a foreign language. So yes, speaking is something that we do naturally and without thinking in our first language. It's when we're trying to reconstruct that in another language that we realise how complex it actually is and how much we're actually doing subconsciously when we speak. So how do we approach that when we're teaching speaking and developing speaking in a classroom? Well, sometimes it's easy. This is what Jeremy Harmer has to say. Getting students to speak in class can sometimes be extremely easy. In a good class atmosphere, students who get on with each other and whose English is at an appropriate level will often participate freely and enthusiastically if we give them a suitable topic and task. So if your students are keen, they've got lots to say, they're good at speaking, the right level, they get on with each other, lots of different ingredients here. But generally, I mean, our students are generally lovely, and speaking is quite easy. But what about when it isn't? Harmer continues here. However, at other times, it's not easy to get students going. Maybe the class mix isn't quite right. Perhaps we've not chosen the right kind of topic, so students don't really have much to say about it because they don't know much about it. Sometimes it's the organisation of the task which is at fault. But a problem that occurs more often than any of these is the natural reluctance of some students to speak and take part, whether that be in their own language or English. In such situations, the roles that teachers play will be crucial. So, what can we do when we have this situation? It's difficult to get students speaking, difficult to get them going. And this kind of problem can sometimes be confounded when we're teaching online remotely because there's a lack of the natural face-to-face atmosphere and the rapport that we have with this. So what can we do to ensure a speaking activity works and it gets students speaking and actually helps develop, not just practice their speaking? Well, I've come up with a series of pillars or key ingredients for a successful speaking activity. And these will provide you with a easy to follow framework, making sure that when you're planning it, you basically just tick these 5 pillars, and it will help develop speaking and help students develop their confidence in speaking. Now, before I go into these, I'm going to demonstrate a little activity. Now, this is an activity that you can do in class, but it's also kind of, you can do it quite easily when you're teaching online as well. So, in order to do this, I'm just going to go to the whiteboard. So, first of all, I'm going to ask for your help in the chat box. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I'd like you to just type in the chat box if you think you know the answer. These are vocabulary questions. Okay, so the first word is a word that it describes an organization, a kind of system. It's often used on an app or on a website, and it's where you basically, if you've got things that you don't need and you don't want them to throw away, but you think other people might need them, you can use this system, this organisation, to give away things that you've got to other people. You've got any idea what this might be? Charity, yeah, but it's not so much charity, it's more a kind of neighbourhood platform. Okay, it begins with free. It's a bit like eBay, Musa, but except people don't pay for it. Secondhand store, Dropbox, these are all kind of very similar. So it's the name of the organisation is free, and it's a way of recycling things. Free and okay, you might not have heard of this. It's called FreeCycle, and it's basically, as I said, it's an organisation where people can post things that they don't need, and other people can collect those. Okay, the next word is a thing. It's a rectangular thing. There you go, Helen Heather. Excellent, FreeCycle. It's a rectangular thing. It's very hard, and you use it to build walls or houses. Yay! Well, that was very quick off the mark there. A brick. Yeah. I think that was Nuria who got that. Good. Okay, the next word is the thing that we use to join bricks together when we're building a wall or a house. Oh yes, God, you're so quick. That's amazing. Mortar, or call it cement as well. Excellent. Okay, so the next word is, it's a verb, and it's when we put something on top of each other like that. Pile, someone got it there. Heiki, stack. That's the word I was looking for. Good. Okay. Now, the next word, it's a kind of flat rectangular metal thing that we put food on when we're cooking. Tray. It's similar to a tray, but it's kind of long metal bars, so there's space. Begins with, yeah, we've got it there. Rack. Sorry, I missed who got that. Good. Okay. Now the next word is a type of cooking where you have heat from above, or could be below, but grill. We've got it. Grill. And of course, in American English, as some of you rightly said, broil. Okay. Now the next word is a long metal thing that you can put meat or vegetables on in order to cook them. Skewer, that's the one. Crikey, you're so quick. Okay, good. And the final word is something that we use to cook on outside. Barbecue, yeah. That's it. Right, so as I'm sure you're all aware, we've had a very different situation throughout the world over the past month, which has found a lot of us on lockdown, and it means a lot of us have had to change the way we do things, including teaching online. But also, something I've found more is that I'm doing things a lot differently in terms of free time and leisure. So here in the UK, we're allowed out for one form of exercise per day, whether that's a walk, a run, a bike ride, whatever. But what about when we're at home? Well, I'm quite fortunate in that I've got a garden, and I've had this DIY project that I've wanted to do for ages. And it's only having this time at home and having the materials there, like sitting and taking webinars. Exactly, Suzanne, yeah. It's only that I've actually had the time to get on with this project that I've been putting off for a while. So what happened first, because I planned to do it a while ago, is I needed a lot of bricks. Now, in order to get bricks, I went on FreeCycle and I asked, has anyone got any bricks they don't want? And I was very fortunate. 2 people got in touch with me and said, I've got a load of bricks, they're brand new, come and get them. So I went and got them. And then what I decided to do with these bricks, can anybody guess? Thinking about the words we looked at before. No? Okay, well, I'll tell you. So what I did was I made this. And this is my brick barbecue. So what I did was I started by I started getting these trays here, marking out on the ground exactly where to put them, and then I built slowly, layer by layer. I stacked the bricks, and then finally put some bricks on top of these trays here, put some charcoal in, and let it. And definitely no, I didn't use any mortar, because the thing is, although I do have a garden, it's not the biggest garden. And so obviously in winter, when I won't be using this, I might want to do something else with the bricks. So I built it up stack by stack, got it going, really nice. And then I used some skewers to make some meat and vegetable things. And then, of course, as soon as it started cooking, I had a little visitor. And that's my dog, who's called Poppy. Now, obviously, what started as a barbecue has now been called, in my house, a dog torture device. Anyway, good. So that was my speaking activity. So a few questions about this. Okay. So before that, this is an example of a speaking activity, which is, I think, is quite relevant for the situation we've got at the moment with the lockdown and teaching remotely. And it's basically a lockdown DIY how-to project. So you could, for example, get students talking about something they've done, taking photos and sharing them online. Or you could just get students to choose a photo that they've got there, talking about something that they've done during lockdown. It could be a show and tell, where students share photos of something they've got home. It could be related to this cooking. They could do a recipe. They could take photos at different stages of something that they cook. Could be a traditional dish, or just a dish that they like, or a DIY project. There's lots of opportunities with photos, I think, especially kind of when we're teaching online like this. Lots of different uses for this in terms of language as well. So, for example, they could just share a photo that was taken at an important moment, talk about what was happening before it, that kind of thing. Looking at past continuous, they could take a photo of an object, just show part of it, and get students to guess what it is using kind of deductive language. What else? They could do things on a daily walk, taking photos of different plants and wildlife, especially since this seems to be booming right now, and see if other students can guess what they are. Or they could take photos of their favourite lockdown activities. Just a few ideas found around here. So with this activity, where I was describing my barbecue, imagine that I'm a student in your classroom, and I was describing my how-to DIY lockdown project. What was the, if you want to type your answers in the chat box, what was the communicative goal of this speaking task? What was my, okay, yeah, explaining. Overcome the fear of public speaking. Yeah, all good ideas. I think what we've got here is a lot of elements of this speaking activity. But I would say the communicative goal of this is just quite simply to describe a lockdown activity or to give instructions on how to complete the project. Second question, if your students were doing this activity, how could they prepare for it? Yeah, find a photo. Yeah. Plan using the photos. Yeah, use photo. Okay, brilliant. Find pictures, brainstorming, summarize what they want. So I think excellent ideas. Fantastic. Okay, now thinking in terms of the tools for the task, not the physical tools for the barbecue, but the language tools that I needed in order to describe this activity. What language did I need? Verbs, definitions, yeah. Sequencing words, yeah. Past, present tenses. Okay, great. So there's a range of vocabulary and grammar that you've come up with there that I would need in order to complete this task. Yeah, good. How was this task personalized? Yeah, yeah. Personal pics, something about yourself, first person singular, favorite activity. Yeah, excellent. Okay, then once students done this task, described a lockdown activity, what can they do with it? What can the other students do with that in terms of feedback? Ask questions. Yeah, retelling groups, follow-up questions. Oh wow, fantastic. Pros and cons. How safe is it? Compare retail. Yeah, good. Or if you've got a lot of students doing it, they could just have a class vote. Which was the best one? Which would they most like to try? That kind of thing. Okay, now these questions that I've just asked you basically relate to the 5 ingredients of a successful speaking activity. What do you think these ingredients might be? Yeah, personal vocab, teaching, sharing, collaborative words, idioms, practice, raising vocabulary. Yeah, fantastic. Great. So I think you pretty much mentioned almost all of them there. Here are the 5 that I've got. So what are the ingredients of a successful speaking activity? So first, above all, our very first starting point should be a clear communicative goal. Now, a communicative goal of a speaking activity is, what do you want them to achieve with this? Not in terms of the language, but in terms of what they're actually doing. So the clear communicative goal for the speaking activity that I just did would be not to practice vocabulary, not to use a past or present perfect tense, whatever. It would be to describe a project, a DIY project, or to give instructions how to complete something. The point with the clear communicative goal is, if you interrupt students and ask them, what are you doing? The answer should never be, I'm practicing the present perfect, or I'm using this vocabulary. It should always be in terms of practically what they're doing. So if you interrupted them during this task and said, what are you doing? Their answer should be, I'm giving instructions how to do a DIY task, not I'm practicing this vocabulary, whatever. basically what we're doing, what we always have to remember is where we're practicing and developing speaking as a skill, is we're preparing students for the type of speaking that they need to do outside the classroom. So when students are in a situation, we don't want them stopping and thinking, oh right, I need to use the present perfect for here, or is it the past simple? Do we know when it should be right? I need to achieve this goal. I need to describe an experience or something. The second key ingredient there is preparation time. So I always like to think of it as kind of a exponential kind of formula. So a minute's worth of preparation time for a speaking activity for a student is likely to result in 5 minutes more speaking time. Having a chance to prepare is going to make them much more successful because they're not having to think so much on the spot. They've got notes or even just ideas, even if it's just thinking time, silent thinking time. It's going to help them much better. Part of preparation time, they might also listen to a model of an expert speaker or a successful speaker doing this task as well. Okay, so the next stage is having the tools for the task. And this is where our specific language teaching comes in. So the tools for the task for the activity that I did was the vocabulary that they needed. It might also be grammar that they need. There might be a specific pronunciation point. Or it might just be functional language. It might just be phrases that they need. So the tools for the task in terms of the language they need might also be reading information about, if you're going to get them, for example, talking about different places to stay on holiday, part of the tools of this might be reading some information about different places as options. Okay, the next stage, the next successful ingredient, I think, is personalisation. Now, personalisation is really useful because the best thing about personalisation, especially if you've got this problem of students not having much to say about a particular topic, the best thing about personalisation is that every person is an expert on themselves and they know more about themselves than anyone else. So they're never going to really run out of ideas of things to say. Plus, the good thing about personalisation is that it helps kind of build a group rapport between students, because if students are sharing something about their lives, it's then very easy for other students to respond with things about their lives as well. And it builds this nice kind of group dynamic and group rapport. Now, the final ingredient of a successful speaking activity, I think, it kind of goes round full circle here, is the reflection stage. Now, it's not just reflection in terms of what they've done, but it's also looking back at what they've done and picking out the bits that they can then use that worked well outside the classroom and in the future. And this kind of comes back full circle to the clear communicative goal, because we said what we're doing with developing speaking is we're setting up students with skills and strategies for speaking that they can use outside the classroom. And the reflection stage allows the good points of this to be transferred to that goal when they're doing this outside the classroom. So, just while I notice it, Grace, your question, yeah, all age groups, I think. If you're talking about that speaking activity, yeah, definitely. Okay, so how does Roadmap provide for these? How does it meet all of these 5 criteria for a speaking activity? So the first point was a clear communicative goal. Now, the point that's worth making here is that every lesson in Roadmap has speaking as its main goal. Now, these goals are taken and drawn from the GSE, the Global Scale of English. And what this is, in case you're not that familiar with it, is it's kind of like an extension of the Common European Framework, except it's much more detailed and much more practical. Now, if this is something that you're interested in, I can recommend this. There are going to be a couple of talks specifically on the GSE as part of the Spring Days. Sarah is going to be talking on Friday at 5 p.m. about it, and Mike's going to be talking next Friday at 11 a.m. about it. So basically, it's a bit like the Common European Framework, but much more detailed. Now, there's a free teacher toolkit online, which I'll give you the address for in a second, where you can really make use of this. So first of all, you can pick a level. As you can see, we've got all the way here from A1 to C2. And you can choose categories, so it's grammar and vocabulary. General learning objectives relate to these clear communicative goals. So let's say, for example, I want to use the sliders to move it into A2 plus level. And it gives me a range of communicative goals. So there's things like can ask and talk about very basic symptoms and ailments, can make and accept offers, can use simple, everyday, polite forms of greeting and address, and so on and so on. So every one of the main lessons in Roadmap, oh, sorry, before I go on, that's the address there. It's very easy to remember. English.com GSE Toolkit. So every one of the lessons in Roadmap is built on one of these communicative goals. Now, that means that basically when we were writing Roadmap, we wrote it kind of backwards, if you see what I mean, each lesson. So we started with the end of the lesson, what do we want the students to achieve in terms of a clear communicative goal? Then we look back, so the link's just on the top right hand there, Jean. So yeah, basically we started with this goal and then we worked backwards and said, right, so what grammar do they need? What vocabulary do they need? What input in terms of reading or speaking do they need, which is going to give the material that they need? Thank you, Tina and Catalina. Is my picture covering the link? I thought I'd docked it. Okay, apologies anyway. Okay, so yeah, so there's the backward planning there. So each lesson starts at the end, what do we want students to achieve? So here's an example. So at the start of each lesson, you'll see an overview here with the goal. This is the first part. So in this lesson, it's describe past experiences. Sorry, I'm just noticing in the chat, you can move the picture. Okay, good. So we start with the goal, describe past experiences. And then we've got the main points, the grammar and vocabulary, that are essentially the tools for the task of achieving this goal. So in this lesson, the final speaking task, which we have with every lesson, students will be talking about experiences they have had in the past. So obviously, when we're starting with this, we're thinking, well, what grammar best suits this? And in this case, it's present perfect with ever and never. And then due to the topic, the vocabulary, we've got different verb phrases, which will help with that as well. Okay, so moving on to the next point is preparation time. So at the end of each main lesson in Roadmap, I'll show you a complete spread in a moment, we have, it all leads towards this final speaking activity, which is then further split up into two parts, prepare and speak. So here's an example, and this is from the same lesson where they talk about experiences. And basically for the speaking task, they play a game called Truth or Lie, where they talk about things that they've done, and some are true, some are false. Sarah, is that okay? All right, I'm going to move on. It will be on the recording if you want to check it later as well. Okay, so this is the first part of that speaking activity, the prepare stage. So what they do first is they've got a model, and in most lessons, students will hear a model of people doing the task first, so they know, they get a feel of what it should sound like. So they hear people playing it, quick gist task, bit more detailed comprehension task, and then they respond to it, listen, check your ideas. Then they prepare their own parts for the game. So they basically choose 2 of these that they have and 2 of these that they haven't had, and they make notes on it, basically. This ensures that when they come to do the speaking activity, they're not coming to it cold. They've got some ideas, they've thought about it, they've made notes which they can use, but even if they don't use the notes, the actual thinking about it will get them prepared. Lenka, there's a model for almost every speaking activity. If it's not here, then the input earlier in the lesson, if there's listening, will serve as the model as well. So either directly or indirectly, there is a model for each one. Okay, so the next point was the tools for the task. Now, I think the best thing here is for me to show you a complete spread. Now, this is from the A2 plus level. It's the one I'm most familiar with because it's the first one that we wrote. So this is what a whole lesson looks like. Now, appreciate it's difficult to see all the detail on this, but let's zoom in a bit. So in terms of giving them the tools for the task, this is what they've got. So first, they've got the overview that we said. Now, this is a bit blurry, so I'll just read it out. So the goal is for them to choose a place to stay on holiday. The grammar, they're going to be comparing things and choosing the best one. So we thought the best grammar, most useful grammar for this would be looking at superlatives. And then because they're talking about hotels, obviously the vocabulary is hotels and places to stay. Right, so the next point they've got in terms of the tools for the task, the things they need, is the vocabulary. So as we said, it's things related to hotels, travel, places to stay. And the next point, let me just see if I can slide across. Good, it's this arrow here. And here they read about 3 different interesting places that they could stay. We've got, example, a hotel in Peru, a hotel in Indonesia, and a hotel in Seychelles. So this gives them an idea of the kind of information that they'd be looking at. So we've got tools so far instead of vocabulary and information. Okay, then we get to the grammar. And as I said, here they talk about superlatives because, as I said, they're going to be comparing things and then choosing the most suitable. Next, in terms of tools for the task, is the speaking activity. And here, as we saw before, they've got the preparation stage. So they listen to a model, they listen to someone actually doing the task, and then they plan and make their notes. And they've got these points here to help them, guide them with their notes. And finally, they come to the speaking activity itself, and they've also got some useful phrases, some functional phrases. So here we kind of try and extend the language to make it as directly useful to this task as possible. We also try and mix in some of the grammar here as well and the vocabulary, so it's kind of really kind of mixing it together to get it to them to use it. And it's worth also mentioning that every lesson as well has got a pronunciation focus. So here they listen to sentences, they listen and repeat. And the focus of the pronunciation is always related to the grammar section. So we don't just randomly pull out bits of pronunciation or work on these 2 sounds or whatever. It's always related specifically to the grammar. So by the time they get to do this speaking task, which is the focus of the lesson, they've had relevant vocabulary, relevant information, relevant grammar, listened to a model, and had specific preparation in terms of content, and some useful functional language as well. So by the time they come to do the speaking task, they've got all the tools at their disposal, and they can have a successful task. Okay, now the other ingredient, Catalina, it's a roadmap. Yes, there are lots of online resources for the book, and there's the usual suspects, the workbook, the teacher's book, photocopiables. There's an online teacher portal for use of the interactive whiteboard. There's an online student portal for extra practice. There's also an app where they can have extra practice on the go as well. Okay, so the next ingredient was personalisation. Now, personalisation is something I'm a very big fan of, for reasons that I've touched on already. But what we've done with Roadmap is try and include personalisation absolutely everywhere we can. Yeah, it's all levels. There are 8 levels from A1 to C1. So, for example, this is from a lesson at B2 plus level, and it's on a favourite speaking activity for British people, which is talking about the weather. So these opportunities for personalisation, they appear at every possible corner throughout Roadmap. The idea of personalisation in lots of different contexts, it not only helps students map new language to their existing knowledge, but also ensures they have plenty to say. So, for example, in this lesson on the weather, they've learnt some vocabulary for describing different types of weather. They've done a bit of practice, and then they've got this follow-up personalised practice. So tell your partner about 3 of the following topics: the weather you've had in your country, the weather last time you went on holiday, things like a great weather experience or a terrible weather experience that you've had. Here we give them a chance to talk about 3 of them, so they can talk about the 3 they're most likely to know about and have something to say about. But that also gives you the opportunity for mixed ability classes. So if you've got fast finishers, you can say, okay, discuss another 2 of these while you wait for the others. Then in the same lesson, students do a listening where they, again, kind of this serves as a model for the final speaking. They listen to 4 conversations about the weather. So here you can see they've got the task. They listen to the conversations and match them to 4 of these pictures. Then they listen again in more detail and match these sentences with the conversations. This is B2 plus level. Sorry. And then again, more follow-up personalised practice or response to the activity. So have you ever experienced any similar situations to those described? When, what happened? And then you could put students, you can give them a minute to think about what they're going to say, and then they discuss that in pairs or small groups. Later in the same lesson, we've got the grammar, which is ways of talking about the future. And here, after they've studied it, they've done a bit of prong, they've done a bit of control practice, they do some personalised, freer practice here. So talking about next weekend, plans for the next holiday period, how you expect the country to change over the next few years. So extending it beyond weather, but all personalised topics here. Now, when we're teaching online, there are lots more opportunities for developing personalisation as well. Most people, well, I say most people, me, on my computer, I've got hundreds of photos from the last few years, each of which of those photos tells a story that I can expand on. So you can pull that out straight away. People have things lying at home, or even in the background to their video. I mean, looking at my background, you can probably tell a few things about me. I like art. Ooh, where am I pointing? I like art. I play guitar. I like to advertise roadmap in my house. And also I've got lots of books, so I must be very studious. Although if you take a closer look, you'll see some of these children's books. We've got old things just stuffed here, a box of receipts, and actually quite messy. Anyway, good. So moving on swiftly. So the final successful ingredient of successful speaking activity. Oh yes, Eva, a rabbit as well. There you go, little doorstop. So the final ingredient we mentioned was reflection. Now in roadmap, this takes a few forms. So first up, we have reflection in the student book, and this is seen as a kind of classroom activity, and it gives students an opportunity to respond to and reflect on other people speaking in the lesson. So here this is back from the lesson where they were doing the truth or lie game. They do the activity, then they repeat it, they play it with a different partner, and then you've got a chance for them to reflect here. Who told an interesting true story? Who told an interesting lie? Now, in the teacher's book, poor ears of the rabbit. Oh yeah, listening to me drone on probably. Sorry. So also in the teacher's book for every lesson, for every single lesson, we have these suggestions for further reflection. And it's pretty much the same format. It's write the following questions on the board, and then students discuss the questions. They can then share their ideas with the class, but obviously don't force them if they'd rather not. And the questions are different for every lesson, and they're always tailored to the content of each lesson. Here there are things like, what were the 3 most useful phrases you learnt in this lesson? In what situations might you use these in the future? What can you do to practice persuading someone in English in the future? So again, it's not just reflection, it's also a kind of proflection, if that's a word. So it's getting them to look back at what they've done in the classroom, pick out what worked well and what was most useful, and then also think about how specifically they can use it in the future. And this makes what they do in terms of developing speaking in the lesson purely transferable. And that's something, another big theme throughout Roadmap. We want to be developing, not just practicing skills. We want to be setting students up with strategies that they can transfer and use outside the classroom. Now, in addition to that, after every 2 lessons, every 2 units, we have a check and reflect page. And sorry, this isn't a great definition here, but basically just to give you an idea. So they have review activities which relate to the grammar and vocabulary in each lesson. You can also do this as a test if you wanted to as well. It's all keyable. And then finally, they have this reflect section. So let me try and bring it up into the center. So here they have these statements relate to the communicative goal at the start of each lesson. And they're worded as can-do statements, which relate to the statements in the GSE, the Global Scale of English. So basically, here we've got 4. I can compare place to visit. I can choose a place to stay. I can describe past experiences. I can give and respond to news. And students rate those as to how confident they feel. So again, it's the type of reflection that they can look at and see what they can use now, help them build confidence, and what they need to work on further. So it kind of brings it full circle. So then finally, just to give you a kind of overview, what types of speaking does Roadmap teach? Well, I've put together a list from kind of flicking through a few of the levels. It's not exhaustive, but it gives you an idea of the kind of things we cover. So there are things like conversations, debates, and at higher levels, these become more kind of things like panel discussions. Again, trying to keep it as real as possible. Presentations, there's works on presentations throughout. Problem solving, which relates to kind of future skills, which gives me a little inroad to mention in my next webinar next Tuesday, which is on developing future skills for further academic learning and employment. Narration of stories, anecdotes, again, this links to the personalisation, so telling personal stories, negotiating, carrying out surveys where they go around the class asking lots of people, ranking tasks, putting things in order, justifying, describing things, brainstorming, trying to find solutions, planning together things as groups. There's one in A2 Plus where they plan an event, role plays and simulations, summarizing, telling jokes. They don't have to be funny, just as a prerequisite. Mingling activities where they talk to lots of people, making arrangements, and things on video conferencing and dealing with problems which inevitably occur with video conferencing. So that leads us to question time. If you have any questions still, if you want to pop them in the box, and I'll try and answer them. Can we add audio-lingual system to this? Depends what you mean. If you mean the audio-lingual approach, then like most kind of teaching methodologies, we pick out the best bits. So there's a bit of drilling into it. If you just mean kind of audio, then there's lots of that with it as well. I'm just picking out the ones I can keep track of. What is mingling activities is when students stand up and walk around and speak to each other. Or if it's online, they can just randomly pick people to speak to each other kind of out of the whole classroom.
Damien, we have had one question that's been put in a couple of times, is what games do you recommend for developing speaking skills?
Any games, really. Any games that you use kind of for fun. There's in roadmap, there's at the end of the book, we've got some specific board games which are created to reuse and practice, revise the language. But there's a multitude of different games. You can use things like Find Someone Who. You can get students to write their own sentences on slips of paper and share them randomly as a kind of Find Someone Who. Board races, lots and lots.
Thank you. One question that you may have missed as well was, how would you approach correcting students in speaking activities?
Okay, so if it's the kind of speaking activity that we've been talking about here, I would generally try not to interrupt them. What I'd do is I'd make a note myself, especially if it's a common error or an error related to the language that we've been studying. Then afterwards, when we finish the activity, done the reflection and feedback, I type these up on either real or virtual whiteboard and correct them as a class. That way, I think you're getting students to reflect on the language that they've used, but you're not drawing attention to who made the mistake, as it were. And another point on that as well, I think it's important to highlight speaking activities, not just on errors, but also any really good phrases that you hear, really, useful phrases that you think will help other students. Then you can drill them around the class as well.
We had a question which came past earlier, which is about the use of breakout rooms in a speaking activity, particularly around monitoring speaking. Do you have any views on that?
I think it's, was it about the one about, I think I just saw that, about only being able to monitor one room at a time. Yeah, I mean, I think that's very similar to what we do in a face-to-face classroom. I mean, unless you've got 20 ears, I think you can only really monitor one pair at a time. Well, one thing that you can't do, I think, online so easy is what I often do in class is I often kind of pretend I'm monitoring one pair, but I'm actually listening to a pair over there, so that I don't get so much of a kind of performance and more of a real speaking. You see what I mean? Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if that's a great answer, but I'm not sure there's much you can do in terms of monitoring more than one.
Well, thank you very much, Damien, for taking us through how Roadmap develops speaking skills. It was very useful and interesting, and thank you all for attending this webinar. Damien will be speaking next week, giving a webinar next week on how Roadmap develops future skills. So if you'd like to attend that webinar, please do. But with that, thank you very much, Damien.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for coming. Bye.